Hello, everyone, and welcome to Achieving Trustworthy Data with Jamf. My name is Jeremy Berger. I'm the founder and operator of Berger Consulting. I have been in the IT asset management space for the better part of 20 years, but have realized in those 20 years that there's a bit of a gap in how we measure ourselves and our activities. And a lot of that, I have noticed, also comes from a lack of knowledge around certain demands that are placed on asset managers, and the lack of knowledge from the sysadmin community about what we're really trying to achieve. So in today's discussion, if you can take a look at the agenda here, we're going to start off with a little bit of an introduction and take a deeper dive into some definitions, and then go down into a deeper dive on what we mean by trustworthy data and how the Jamf sysadmins of the world can help out us asset managers. Now, the problem, as I see it, is that the ISO IEC 19770 standards specifically require a trustworthy data within the IT asset management systems, of which Jamf is also considered. However, in true ISO IEC form, they never tell you how to achieve or what they mean by this trustworthy data. So today's discussion is going to be how my organization uses what we call pragmatic ITAM to generate a report that we call discovery tool alignment. And we can do this to have to provide a definition around trustworthy data, and then leverage that to springboard into completing the maturity required inside ISO IEC. So let's talk a little bit. I just threw out a bunch of acronyms, and it's probably early in your day. And so while you're sipping on your coffee and trying to catch up, let me fill in a couple of these gaps. The International Association for Standardization and the sister group, the International Electrotechnical Commission, is an independent group out of Switzerland that's been around for 150 to 175 years. And they are providing the standards of measure and best practice guides for everything from the size of shipping containers to fuel mixtures to machining tolerances to IT connections, the Wi-Fi standard, the TCP/IP. All of these have these tolerances and definitions and standards wrapped around them, and those are provided by the ISO IEC. And if you want more information, the link to the Wikipedia page is quite informative. Now, I mentioned that they have a concern for asset management. They've also got a concern for IT security. They have a concern for a number of different things inside IT departments. For asset management, it is the 19770 standard. And that helps govern how you know whether or not you're doing your job correctly, whether or not you're getting all the information necessary from your asset management tools like ServiceNow or Flexera, and including SCCM and Jamf. But inside these, so why then should we care about these standards? Well, these standards also provide the best business practice foundation for things like ITIL and IT for IT. They also help organize IT's efforts within the rest of the organization. If you're part of a healthcare provider group or manufacturing or any of the other worldwide business concerns, then IT, being a part of that, should be aligned with those organizations getting the ISO certifications they need in order to do business on a national and world stage. And finally, external governmental bodies are going to require organizations to meet a particular standard of care, especially with their data consumption and handling. High Trust for healthcare, FFIEC for financial institutions, even the California policies and EU GDPR will make reference to these, to 19770 in particular and ISO standards in general. So here's a graphic I actually borrowed from the 19770 matured manual. And in 2017, the model was changed. It used to be, before this, a 5-tier model. You probably have seen echoes of this. It's this 5 stair step where it starts down at the bottom being 0, where you're not doing anything, and 5 being this mythical, everything's great, Lake Wobegon, where all the IT employees are handsome and all the problems are taken care of, and the paychecks are above average. But nobody ever got to 5, and most everybody was down in like 2 or 3, and they could never figure out how to get beyond that. So they scrapped it, ISO did, and went to this 3-tier model. The bottom being trustworthy data, and really simply know what you've got so that you can manage it. And the second tier, applying the asset lifecycle integration. Have you purchased it? Have you received it from purchasing yet? Have you configured it? Is it deployed? Have you recovered it, and are you going to keep it, or are you going to pitch it? Those sorts of questions. And then finally, you can take that data, roll it up into the optimization. And this is where you can, as an asset manager, start pushing back on software audits or leverage this information to get a better deal on your volume license agreement negotiations. But deeper into the manual, the definition of trustworthy data is here on the slide. And quite frankly, it's pretty darn useless. If we were in a room together, COVID notwithstanding, we could go around the room and have a different definition of what we mean by accurate, what we mean by complete, readily understood. That's a good one. What the heck do you mean by readily understood? And it's just pretty well useless. So where do we go from here? Well, my background is actually in philosophy and military history. And like any good philosopher, I take every opportunity where I can drag my liberal arts degree and show that it's useful. So of the pantheon of founding philosophers for Western civilization is a guy by the name of Rene Descartes. You might not know the name, but you've probably heard the phrase, I think, therefore I am, or for you Latin lovers out there, cogito ergo sum. Now, I don't have a lot of time, and I don't want to bore you with the details. It is kind of a fascinating story about where he's coming with this. But the end result of why he says, I am a thinking thing, is that he's trying to prove his own existence. And he deduces that of all the things that could be influencing how he experiences the world and life and existence, he realizes that the common denominator is his own mind. He has to exist in order to be influenced by all of these different scenarios that he could think of that would try to convince him that the world isn't as he believes it to be. So what does that mean for us? Well, the caveat to that realization is that something exists when it interacts with other things in its world. So for asset managers, one of the big questions that we have to ask is a device or is a piece of software in our computing environment? And sometimes trying to track this stuff down is like trying to find a black cat in a dark room at night with the windows closed and you're not even sure there's a cat. But we do know that these things are going to be interacting with other systems. Modern networking means that there's things like DHCP and DNS that are assigning IP addresses and computer names. You've got your Active Directory, which is controlling controlling and recording what things are being logged into the network, what kind of permissions they have, and watching them bounce around and connect to different services. There's also SaaS now, which those login records will help with showing activity even when a user or a device isn't directly connected to the network, but they're sending email, they're checking web or Word documents, or even bouncing files back and forth out of cloud storage. And then finally, of course, is Jamf, which is some of the big, one of the major command and control systems that are out there in the world. You can't have more than about 100 computing devices without something like Jamf to maintain your sanity. Otherwise, you're just constantly spinning your wheels, setting up and controlling and making sure that those things don't run off and disappear into the night. So for pragmatic ITAM's purposes, what we can then do, and what I recommend to my customers, is that we find 3 systems that we can then bring in login data and compare and contrast. But we can't just grab anything, though. We have to have a little bit of sense around it. And there's 3 things that I want you to remember when we bring this kind of a Venn diagram together. First is we need to look for tools that operate independently of each other inside the computing environment. So what do I mean? Is that Active Directory is a standalone system. But if you look to IT security, they have a couple of standalone logging systems that they'd be very happy to share some or parts of that data if you ask nicely. But when it comes to especially agent systems, say antivirus, which if you were required to have antivirus on every one of your computer devices, you would think that that would be a good system of note to bring data in and do this compare and contrast. The trouble is that if you send an agent out by your command and control system like Jamf, if that device is not talking to Jamf, then that target device is not going to receive your antivirus agent or your VPN agent or whatever other system you think you need. So make sure that these things are operating independently of each other and scanning the entire network on their own, not dependent upon any other access or agent. Now, the second thing to consider is obviously you've got to be measuring the same systems. Not all operating systems, not all platforms will show up in the same scanning tools. Lord help me, I'm going to make this joke. You've got to compare apples to apples. Yeah, that one fell flat when I told it to the 10-year-old too. But you would be surprised on how often you will get a report back from a sysadmin and it doesn't seem to make any sense, and it's because you're comparing Windows devices from your Active Directory on your Jamf data. And of course, you can't figure out why they're not meshing. Now, finally, the other thing to consider is that you want to make sure that you've got the right key field. Not every scanning tool is going to be able to give you all of your data attributes that you want. So you want to make sure that you've got at least something in common that you can touch against. Now, any of my fellow asset managers that might be listening to this are probably screaming bloody murder. You have to use serial numbers for your asset record identification. And they're right. But things like AirWatch and what's the other big one? AirWatch or Tenable or some of the other, or even Active Directory, are not going to be able to reach into the NetBIOS and pull those serial numbers out. But they will know things like MAC addresses, or even the fully qualified domain names, or even the NetBIOS names. So long as you've got something to compare these computers against each other from these three different systems, you'll be okay. And then you can use that to sort of Rosetta Stone into a serial number and use that source of truth, or use that system that is delivering the serial number as your source of truth to populate your asset MDR or your CMDB. So once you have this report, what do you end up doing with it? Well, it's going to, when you put it into a Venn diagram arrangement like this, you get kind of a three-tier result. And these results are very telling. Not just that where they all are in agreement, this ABC section. That tells you where everybody's in agreement. Those are actually devices you don't have to worry about. That means that they're in the environment. Everybody that has a concern, either for vulnerability or access management or software license consumption, everybody sees that device. Those things are great. Don't worry about them. But in this penumbra that orbit around ABC, where two of the systems and not agree, but not the third, this AB, BC, and AC group. In my experience, those records, those devices are usually indicate that that missing third system is having some sort of communication issue. It could be that an agent has been disabled or is missing from that device. It could be that there is a hidden subnet that is not being penetrated, or that it's somewhere being blocked. With the COVID activity going on and so many people in work from home positions, the VPN system is a surprisingly dark area that network security and Active Directory might be having trouble with. So watch out. Then you've got this third tier of numbers, this A, B, and C group, where the device record only appears in one of these sources. Usually that indicates a change in the environment or the life cycle of that device. Somebody is either, somebody more than likely has removed that device or changed its configuration in some way, and the sole identifier just hasn't caught up to the change yet. Not to bash the competition, but SCCM can take as long as 90 days to purge a dead record. It will tell you that it is there and expect it's there and continue to scan that IP address as if that device was there. Not that, that's why Jamf is smarter than that. But anyway, so now that we've got this bullseye and a explanation for and a prescribed activity around the things that fall outside that bullseye, we can now look back and see on how this impacts SAM, the trustworthy data. Now that we know that these things are out there because we've triple checked it, and if they're not out there, then we know where to look to make sure that the gaps are filled. We can then move into the second tier of the maturity hybrid model and say all of these devices are deployed in our network in some form or fashion, or we will be able to confirm it within the next 3-5 business days. And that means then we can look at our asset MDR or our CMDB and say, okay, this list of bullseye devices have to be considered deployed in the asset lifecycle. If any of those devices are not flagged as deployed, then you've got a problem and an update opportunity to make that data work better. Maybe one of the online service technicians hasn't updated the record yet. Maybe there's a broken connection between the service request ticket and updating the CMDB itself. Or maybe it hasn't been received yet, or you don't realize that it's been received and it slipped through the cracks and is now out there on the in the environment and hasn't been properly configured yet. Once you have the asset lifecycle figured out, then you start to really make some hay. Because from the asset manager's perspective, only devices, or at least 99% of the time, only the devices that are in the environment and being actively used will consume a software license. The sooner you can detect changes in the environment and when these machines either blink on or blink off, you can then adjust how the software licenses are spread around. And that's the opportunity where you can interrupt and realize you don't have to buy more software. You can reuse stuff from the devices you have confirmed are no longer in use. So what's the end result here? Well, what we're talking about is that you as Jamf sysadmins can make a bright line connection between your activity, which you might think is just a service support and end user support, and draw that line directly to cost saving measures in your IT hardware and software budgets. And just to add a little more sweetness to that activity, Gartner, back in 2016, released an article that said most software or most IT organizations, IT departments can cut their software spend by 30% if they can make that bright line designation between what Jamf and SCCM and those command and control systems are doing directly into software license purchases, recovery, and defense against software licensing audits and license agreement negotiations. So let's talk case studies, because every good asset manager has a horror story or two. And I have two here for two of my former clients. And these are the actual numbers of the first scan that we made for their environment we used. On this first one, I will admit it is SCCM, it is not Jamf, but the logic works just the same. If you'll notice that there is just a high number of computer records that were active in Active Directory. And come to find out, the reason was this was a call-in center, third-party call-in center that had to use Windows XP for a client. But they forgot to disable the Windows XP virtual machines that they were using for this project. What's worse is that they had a software license agreement for one of their software vendors that measured computer licenses by Active Directory accounts. So needless to say, they were able to recover about 120,000, let me try that again, 120,000 annual spend just in doing this exercise. Not the least of which, they were able to clean up their operating system environment and improve their IT security stance. On the other one here was a detection of a shadow IT threat. This particular group is a insurance financial organization that has a high number of independent sales reps. The relationship, though, is that those sales reps receive corporate branded laptops and iPads. And in this example, what was happening is the devices were being detected, but the IT security was not. There was a disconnect between the IT security and the networking and Active Directory controls. What ended up happening is that a lot of the devices that they thought were in use from the IT security perspective were actually duplicates and triplicates, because when they released a new vulnerability scanner, they release a little bit and then scan the same subnet and then scan it again, and it would rack up these duplicate records. But once we were able to show that this activity was happening, we went back to the IT security group and was able to say, these are specifically the records that you can delete and then reuse those licenses for other devices. On the flip side, we were able to show that the VPN connections that these devices were supposed to be using, because it is a financial institution, were somehow circumventing. We ended up determining that they were logging into Office 365 directly instead of going and having their VPN turned on. So that shadow IT threat was able to be eliminated. Honestly, all of this work cost us about a week between requesting the reports and going through a couple of iterations on the data attributes, and then running those separate reports in through our database. So in conclusion, as we're here at the bottom of the hour, just to remember what we're actually dealing with here is that ISO IEC has a specific requirement for trustworthy data in their ITM systems, of which Jamf is considered part of. But this group provides no guidance and no recommendations on, or even a good definition about what they mean by trustworthy data. So I recommend that asset managers and reach out to leverage a methodology like pragmatic ITAM and reach out to the sysadmins of IT security vulnerability scans, network operations, and command and control systems like Jamf in order to solidify and properly define what they mean by trustworthy data, get that into your CMDB to wrap the asset lifecycle around, and then start making your hay and get that 30% that Gartner says is out there when you optimize this data. If any of you have any other questions or concerns or would like to learn more about pragmatic ITAM, this is the part where I think I can put in a selfless plug. You can reach my business here, email, and do know that the pragmatic ITAM book should be ready for pre-orders here by the end of September. So I wish you all good luck, good health, and look forward to talking to you later here at the JUNC.